So officially welcome. Hello, I'm Joel Anderson, VP of Marketing here at Tier4 Advisors. Welcome to today's webinar, How to Transform Your Business with Copy Data Virtualization. Looking forward to today's session and hearing from our expert panel. First, today's webinar will be recorded. So along with the contact information and the replay will be sent out to all of you. And second, we'd love to hear from you during today's panel or during today's webinar. If you have questions for our expert panel, please use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen to be able to ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer those throughout the presentation today. So with that said, Jake, I will turn the time over to you and the rest of our panel.
Thanks a lot, Joel. Thank you for all who are attending across the country, maybe even the world today. With technology, you see a background here for me. I am in a rental car out in Utah on family vacation, but able to join this just the same as if I was at HQ there in Atlanta, Georgia. So we're joined by a couple of experts in the sense of knowing what copy data virtualization is and overall data management. We're going to talk through that. Before we get into the meat and bones of the topic, let's go ahead and do a brief introductory round robin. Brooks, we'll start with you, CTO at Lume. Introduce yourself and your company, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'm Brooks Snow. As Jake mentioned, I'm the CTO. I focus on the technology, go-to-market strategies, and kind of our offerings to our customers. What we do is we're a cloud service provider, and we offer private clouds, dedicated, hybrid, on-prem, public, disaster recovery solutions. We offer Workspace Anywhere, which is our VDI implementation. And we also do assessments and security as a service as it relates to those environments. So we have a footprint all over the world. We partner with great data centers, software vendors like Actifio, and we're really excited today to talk specifically about disaster recovery and backup solutions and strategy using Actifio. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Had a personal opportunity I've been working with Brooks now for quite some time. Additionally, with Kevin.Hilson as well. I think we were one of the first, if not the first, Actifio partner way back when here at Tier4 in the Southeast. So Kevin, introduce yourself and Actifio, and we'll go ahead and jump in after that.
Thanks, Jake, and appreciate you having me. So hi, everyone. My name is Kevin.Hilson. Appreciate your time today. I am an account rep with Actifio, specifically covering accounts here in Georgia. I do have a couple of global accounts as well. I've been with Actifio almost since the beginning, going on 10 years now. So I joined when there were about 15 employees. So really passionate about this technology, really passionate about the idea of data virtualization, and look forward to the conversation today.
And again, Jake, let me say something. He says he is the account manager. Let's be honest.
I appreciate that.
I've known him a long time, and he really does a great job. Yeah, 25 now. So.
I agree. There's some people from Actifio that have joined, and just from Brooks, in my opinion, you got Ash, and then you have Kevin over at Actifio.
My ego is just going like this.
That's right. That's right. My name is Jake Sherrill. I founded Tier4 Advisors on the premise of helping IT professionals with everything procurement, enterprise architecture, strategy, planning, etc. The average IT professional does 2 to 3 data center projects in their entire career. I had a hypothesis 8 years ago that if I were to found a company and do projects often, in our case, 100 a year, that are done at sometimes every decade by the average IT end user, that we could help a lot of people. And that's kind of who we are and what we do. And I can get into that detail a little bit further down the road. So let's go ahead and jump right in. A lot of people who have signed up for this webinar, believe it or not, have actually sent messages. What is copy data? And on top of that, what is copy data virtualization? So Kevin, we'll go ahead and start with you. What is data virtualization, and why is data virtualization important today? And talk about copy data along the way as well.
Sure. So when I first interviewed with Actifio, what drew me in was the premise that companies have a lot of copies of their data, right? Production data gets the bulk of the conversation, but think across an organization, right? Your organization, how many copies of that production data do you make? You make backup copies, you make DR copies, you make business continuance copies, you make development copies, analytics copies, compliance copies. the list goes on and on. So copy data very simply is it refers to every copy of your production data that the business requires. The premise of copy data virtualization then is if we can virtualize all those copies and maintain a single golden copy that we can then present virtual images of it for those same business needs, we can save people a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. So the reason it's important is it can not only help you save time and reduce costs, but it can significantly drive your business forward by accelerating application releases, making you more competitive in the marketplace in terms of bringing things to market quicker, and then overall improve your operations within the IT group supporting business units.
Let me dig a little bit further. Specifically, you talked about in development and dev test stage environments, how this is a big deal because when you have to take a large chunk of data that you have to simulate a customer, you have to sanitize that data, and you get that data to the point where there's no secure data that you can actually use to test your application. You now are making, just in dev test staging, I don't even know how many copies you're dealing with over and over and over. So to really highlight the advantage here of Actifio is it really can help control and that data sprawl that we're all suffering with. But when you really get into certain areas like dev test stage, it gets way out of hand, right? So I just wanted to highlight that point.
And the dirty little secret of IT vendors is the more copies of data you have, the more storage you have to buy, the more licenses you have to buy, the more of everything you have to buy, right? So there's not a lot of companies other than Actifio out there that are trying to solve this problem. They might tell you they're trying to solve the problem, but most enterprises have told me over the years that their vendors are just happy to collect another PO, and they're not actually trying to solve the problem of better managing your data. Enter data virtualization, which we'll talk at length here about today.
So that's good. So obviously data is sprawling right now. I heard something the other day that more pictures are taken in a 6-month period of time than were taken in the first 150 years of the camera or something crazy like that. And that's just pictures alone. And again, I mean, 6 months, if that quote is accurate, a 6-month period of time of all the pictures compared to 150 years of all the pictures. But then on top of that, we talk about Excel documents. We talk about, production, DR, tertiary backups, all the other things that come in there. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing clients face right now with just overall data management? I mean, is it just data sprawl? Is it managing the data? Is it all the above? What else? And maybe Brooks, we'll start with you on that.
Yeah. So Jake, you described that, right? And I'm using hand gestures because I speak better with my hands. But you're talking about data that the curve is insane, right? And it's because there's 2 parts. I don't want to minimize this, but we're digital hoarders, right? We are socking that data away. Now there's a reason, right? That data is valuable. No matter what you're doing, it can give a competitive advantage. We talked about dev test staging, right? It can allow you to go to market faster in a secure way where you don't have any data breach issues and you're being honest to your customers. For big organizations like the Googles, right? I mean, they're making their money on data. So we have to keep it because it's valuable and it is that competitive advantage. But to your point, Jake, the data, the tools we have is getting so rich that data is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So here's that conundrum is, what do we do with it? How do we manage it? And then actually, is it valuable? So the first to answer that, it's really how you're tiering that data. And I mean, how do you look at it? Forget the word tier. How do you compartmentalize that data? Is it production? Is it dev? Is it test? Is this valuable information to propel your organization, your business forward? Or is it just we're in this habit, to your point, Jake, we're just storing it just to store it? There is that. That's called waste, right? That's hoarding. That's the hoarding part I'm talking about. And there's this movement that we need to keep everything. And the big problem is looking at it that way. And then once you've created a mess, now how do you fix it? Or do we just keep buying more storage and it just keeps perpetuating, right? And this is where we're getting into this data copy virtualization. But I think those challenges they're natural, they're real. I don't mean to minimize them, But at the same time, there is some of that overvaluing of data that we're keeping. And that data sometimes can be litigation, legal issue that you have to deal with, right? Some have to keep it, law firms. You don't want to keep it because of that security problem or challenge or breach, right?
So I can add in a short story here. So current customer of Actifio, met with them, I mean, this is probably 2 months ago at this point, but we met with one VP of applications. So he owned 20 applications within this large enterprise. So a small portion of the environment, but a very important environment. And there's always 3 questions that I ask when we're sort of going through what the challenges are. And those questions are, what's your largest database? How many copies do you maintain? And how long does it take to make a copy? So I asked them those 3 questions, and the answers were, roughly we have a 1 terabyte SQL database backending each one of these applications. I'm like, all right, that's not too big. How many copies of it do you maintain? His answer was 20. So for every one of his production apps, and therefore production databases behind those apps, he had 20 non-prod environments. And I was almost afraid to ask the next question, which was, how long does it take to refresh or spin up one of those environments? And he kind of didn't really want to answer, but the answer was 4 to 6 weeks. So when his team requests a copy of a database, 4 to 6 weeks, and 30 different resources somehow touch the process, from the developer requesting it, going through the whole process of each person that needs to do their piece of the puzzle, and then 4 to 6 weeks later, the developer gets that copy. So for those on the phone,
Wow.
Hopefully it's not as bad, right? And there were certain reasons why it was really lengthy here with some outsourcing arrangements and whatnot. But now that they're using Actifio and able to automate those refreshes, obviously taking 4 to 6 weeks down to 4 to 6 minutes is significant for the business.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Sounds almost too good to be true, right?
I always say.
So when we talk about, enterprises, like what enterprises should be considering, we talk about resiliency, DevOps, data migrations, cyber, compliance, security, whatnot. Kevin, starting with you, what are some use cases that you can share that that might make sense to some of our listeners today of really because candidly, a lot of people don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Explain a little bit further into, what we're talking about there.
So I just gave everyone a story of what I would consider our use case around accelerating DevOps, and some people would call that test data management. Another quick story would be, an organization that uses Actifio now, but 3 years ago had a major outage, right? Front page of every website and every newspaper around the world. And the story behind the story was their traditional backup tools, the restores took 38 hours for one of their mission critical databases. Now that they use Actifio, that same situation occurs. You're talking about recovering your apps in 23 minutes. So another use case is around resiliency, right? Yeah. And I always try to encourage customers, instead of thinking about a backup project, think of it as a recovery project, right? Traditional vendors, they sort of specialize in backup, right? And that's why they call them backup vendors. And I always try to get people to shift their mindset saying, hey, backup is only as good as your recovery. So if I were you, I would focus more on a recovery project and choosing the best tool to do your recoveries. And with Actifio's ability to do instant mounts, that's where we can check that box. And you can extend that to be cyber resilient as well, right? So if you're worried about ransomware and malware and things like that, the ability to air gap and provide immutable copies of your backups, Actifio can help you achieve that. And then finally, I kind of lump it into data mobility, right? So if you want to move data between on-prem to on-prem site, on-prem to cloud, cloud to cloud, or even sometimes platform migrations, right? The ability to keep data in native application format with Actifio and then spin up these instant points in time allow you to achieve any or all of those use cases with a single license. Sounded like you were going to chime in, Brooks.
Well, I was going to say, like, we got introduced, Jake, to your point, years ago to Actifio, and it was on that resiliency recovery perspective because, I mean, it is so easy to sell back disaster recovery. To recover from that, to actually go through that process is a whole nother world. You got to trust the vendors. You got to trust that they've been doing their job every day, right? Because you have to make sure you're watching that thing, that the backup's still running, that it's actually performing properly, that the alerts are accurate. So you have to do some testing. And what Actifio put together from a recovery perspective to stay on that theme was just something we'd never seen, in particular around databases, and what you could do with the databases and getting system state, all that system state information for a database. There's no one on the market at the time that could do it. So they fit a perfect slot that we needed. And it has expanded ever since then as we worked with them and understanding the value of that, of controlling that data, in particular around security. Knowing where the data is, I mean, that's half the battle. Knowing where it is, what it is, allows you to kind of control your own destiny in the regards of data resiliency. Now, so yeah, for us, it was entering that resiliency perspective, and it's just kind of expanded beyond that, right?
So we talk about the traditional challenges, or the challenges of the traditional, kind of thought process and vendors that are out there. Just, again, not to make this an Actifio and Lume commercial, but talking about the whole, the holistic look at what the challenges are. Why do and we don't necessarily need to mention names of vendors, Kevin, that you compete against, but why do so many of them, suffer at doing this? What are the challenges that they're faced with and candidly, their clients are affected by?
So I sort of boil it down to two categories, right? And I always get asked the question, if Actifio is as good as it sounds, why haven't I heard of you, right? And I do feel like we're a really well-kept secret, right? And I'm working with my marketing group to change that. But status quo is probably the biggest competition, right? People have done things the way they've done them for so long, whether it's maintenance contracts, whether it's people that have done scripts, whether it's internal processes, have done things the same way for so long that sometimes there's some resistance to change, right? Even if it means lowering costs, even if it means bringing the business forward. So that would be the first caution I would throw out there, that if you're evaluating a data virtualization strategy, be aware that there's probably not another vendor out there that can do everything that someone like Actifio can do, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy to get it in the door, right? And usually status quo is the biggest hindrance. And then the second bucket, specifically on other vendors, think of my comment earlier, right? They have so many revenue streams built up from all their different tools, right? I'm sure everyone on the phone can think of, your favorite large IT vendor. They have snapshot tools, they have backup tools, they have storage tools, they have replication tools, they have cloning tools, and the list goes on and on. So for them to kind of do an about face and adopt a data virtualization methodology and try to bring something like Actifio to market, it would almost be like cutting off their foot, because they would be hurting these other revenue streams in the business. So you've seen us develop strong partnerships with Lume and some other IT vendors to help fill that gap. So I think the tide is turning a little bit, but that's one reason why other vendors probably aren't bringing customers stories like this or platforms like this.
Let me say this too, the word recovery, right? I mean, that's a big thing that kind of we were drawn to. I mean, it was not just backup thing, and it's great. It's a part of a business continuity solution, right? But a recovery mindset, Jake and Kevin, it's different. It's different than the backup. Yeah, I got it. A recovery is, how can I recover from? And it takes you through that whole process, not just stop at the backup, but what happens when I need to get it back, right? How long is that going to take? And those time constraints are huge, and that's something that was different about Actifio. And then, so as you were talking, Kevin, I thought that old saying that's attributed to Mark Twain. It says it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they've been fooled. And that's so true in this recovery mindset, and particularly you guys. Like there's a standard out there that everyone says, yeah, I've got big backup, but do you really? Right? You've been fooled, right? And it's so hard to convince people they have been fooled. So when you were talking,
I had a customer once, and his title was backup manager, and I think he was unsuccessful, but he tried to get his title changed to recovery admin, recovery manager. right? And
Yeah,
he kind of said it a little bit as a joke, so I don't know how much he actually tried to pursue it, but he actually tried to change the name of his group from backup team to the recovery team, which, I thought that was kind of cool.
it is.
All right, so let's talk money. So how can customers optimize total cost of ownership, or TCO, savings with data virtualization by leveraging object storage? And, maybe use an example of what you've seen, because, a lot of the conversations we're having right now is, to recover something in, 10 minutes instead of 10 days. Wow, that's pretty impressive. But if am I solving $1 million issue with $100,000 cost, or am I solving $100,000 issue with $1 million cost? So let's get into a little bit of the dollars and cents.
Sure. So from my perspective, there's not many new technologies that can get in an enterprise store without the cost savings. So 100% agree with you there. So I break it into two buckets, hard and soft savings, like most people do, right? And you just hit on the soft savings of, yes, I can now recover so quickly. Yes, I can bring applications to market quicker. Sometimes that's important to leadership. Sometimes it's not. But hard costs it's very tangible, right? So in almost every proposal we do, I'm going to include a business case working with a customer, or I can give them, one that we've used in another scenario and anonymize it. But it comes down to, what I started with, which is if you have let's say a 10 terabyte production system, and you're making 10 copies of it across the environment for backup, for DR, for business continuity, for the auditors, for dev, for test, back in the napkin map will tell you have 100 terabytes of storage associated with these non-prod needs. And maybe you do subsetting and you cut some corners here and there. So maybe it's not quite 100 terabytes, but you have a good portion of your infrastructure, 90% in the example I just gave you, that's non-prod. So if we virtualize those copies, you end up with a 10 terabyte prod copy that we don't touch, a 10 terabyte clone behind Actifio, and you're giving 80 terabytes of disk back to the business. So it's cost avoidance, and you now have storage that you can grow into. And if you take it a step farther, all the backup licensing that you were using for that 100 terabytes, all the snapshot licensing for that 100 terabytes, all the replication licensing for that 100 terabytes now disappears. So your renewals on products like that, if you were to continue to use them in parallel, are going to be minimized. But with Actifio, most enterprises are able to completely eliminate them. So the hard dollar savings alone can show you a substantial TCO reduction and a substantial ROI. And then you add in the soft savings, which just becomes the gravy on top.
And interesting enough, when you're talking about that, what comes to mind is you're by deploying, you're going through that process of categorization, right? Identifying, and that is honestly, as stupid and simple as that sounds, it is the first step. Oh, what is that? Admitting that I have a problem, and once you do that and you have the tools to actually solve it, it's unreal what you can save and what you can see. Because once you categorize, Jake, I mean, you can get into that object storage, right? You can start saying, hey, this isn't production worthy. Let me throw it over here, right, into this bucket, and to be able to have the tool to do that is that is a game changer from a cost perspective.
So, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these big game changers only make sense for larger enterprises, right? Because you have such big, nasty, hairy, complex needs and requirements. But of course, I know the answer. But let's talk this through for a second. Would something like this make sense just the same for a Fortune 15 as it does for a 15-person company, or a 115-person company versus a 15,000 employee company? Can you talk to that a little bit?
So,
what that looks? Yeah.
You want to go first, Kevin, or me? I don't.
No, go ahead, Brooks.
Jump in there.
All you.
So for us, it's yeah. So for us, those savings apply to smaller organizations, mid-market environments, because it's not about a matter of how much data, how big your organization is. Fine, you're dealing with 100 terabytes, a petabyte, whatever. But for smaller organizations, 10 to 20 terabytes is huge, right? So the money that they have, they can't buy those petabyte systems. They're still dealing with that growth curve you talked about in the beginning. That doesn't change for anybody. So I only have $100,000 to spend. I only have $100,000 to spend. I have $100 million to spend. I still have that same problem. That data problem is plaguing everybody from little to big. And we know that because of the consumerization of IT and all that stuff, that even just as consumers, like think how many pictures you're storing now in videos. I looked at my phone the other day and like, it was almost out of space. Like what happened? I got a hold of it and he took like random videos that happened to me in the shower, which is a whole another story, but he's like teasing me. And I look at it and like, I'm at a day, and that's just because of the tools that we have. And so that data problem plagues everybody. And so, yes, the answer, that's why I got a little excited there, Kevin, is because we're seeing it in smaller organizations as well as the frontline headline newspaper type organizations that, you're referring to. It is the same exact problem.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer. I 100% agree. I'm gonna take it a little different direction. Large enterprises, in my experience, have large groups of people to do each of these tasks, right? Each one of these business requirements. So you have dedicated resources, right?
Yep.
And in smaller organizations, you have an IT director or a VP of IT or an IT manager or, whatever the title is. Typically, they're responsible for a lot more. So with changing business requirements, whether they're internal requirements or require new regulations or new compliance that, an entity is forcing on that business, that IT director needs to be able to adapt. And when you have a single individual, I would argue it's almost more difficult for them to adapt to those changing requirements, depending on what they are, than it is a large enterprise. So if we can
100% agree on those resources, right.
If we can automate that, if we can have a single data management tool with resiliency built in that could allow you to handle multiple use cases, just think how easier your operations are going to be. And then if you look at it as a service offering from someone like Lume, now you've taken it even a step further and outsourced it to the expert. So 100% agree with everything you said there about the data growth pile is still significant. But I think the resource contention and the resource effort is even another reason to look at a data virtualization strategy.
No, you took it another level. So if we all have this problem, right, and to your point, it's exacerbated in where you don't have a team to help manage that. Or Jake, you've heard me say this, I don't know, a billion times. The IT organizations are overworked, underpaid, underappreciated. You have a new vulnerability that just came out, and now you've got to patch all your stuff. That wasn't on your to-do list yesterday, right? Your to-do list yesterday was, I want to review my recovery strategy. Well, that just got bummed out because now Intel has a flaw in their chip, right? And it's nothing out of your control. And so to your point, you're drilling on that whole, we all deal with the data problem. It is in some ways, a bigger challenge when you have one resource to do all of it, right? Which gets into people who are just doing backup. They're not thinking about the recovery. They're just enough to, a little pat on the back to make me feel better, knowing that if they ever had to recover, in their head, they're going to be in a world of hurt. It's going to be a horrible week, month, quarter, year, whatever that is to recover. So you're spot on. I agree with you 100%. You're just smarter than me and you go deeper, man. That's all.
Jake, can I make one more point?
Yes.
Another kind of common scenario that I hear is, IT is being told from a business unit or from a CEO or whomever, go to the cloud or do this or do that or reduce costs 30%. So that's another, way to look at it is, it doesn't matter if you're a small organization or the largest of the large, you have things that are put on your plate that completely change how you're going to approach things. So again, the more you can simplify, automate, and utilize tools that will help you change direction on the fly, doesn't matter the size of the organization, everyone needs them.
Yeah, and what's also interesting about when a CEO or someone in the organization says we have to go to the cloud, a lot of people think of AWS as the one-stop, shop, right? The be-all cloud vendor. And, certainly the tooling, the scalability, the resources, some of the things that come with the public hyperscalers make a lot of sense. But, it is unfair to expect an enterprise IT professional to be an expert in something that they may have done once or never in their career. And one of the reasons that we have these types of webinars, to be very clear, is so that we can help educate some of our clients and some of our, candidly, some of our partners and regional presidents on the fact that, AWS and Azure and certainly Google are not a one-stop shop for all things that clients have. And depending on the tiering of applications and the RTOs and RPOs and things like that, again, it makes a lot of sense to think differently than just the standard, sign with Big Blue and I'm all set, for the next 3 to 5 years, so to speak. So let's talk about that for a half second, multiple application tiering, RTOs, RPOs, how do you guys, and when I say you guys, how do your organizations, Actifio and Lume in particular, work together to help a client figure that out?
Go ahead, Brooks. You're the master of SLAs.
So for us, we look at data. The first question we're asking is about data and buckets, and really, which ties very closely to applications. Organizations, Jake, to your point, if you're going to do a migration and you're doing a data center migration, and you've done one in your life, right? That's a nice flip you just did there. It's great for to work with a company like yourself, right? To your point, you guys are repetition. You bring in the vendors, you know how to break it down over and over and over. You're experts at what you do, right? Same with Actifio. What we go in is looking at application, and that way we can break down complex problems and complex structure and this data glob that has happened, right? Where data is just sprawled. And so if you break it down the application, right, and look through the application is what the executives care about. They don't call up asking about, which server is my favorite, which vendor. They don't care, right? They want to know email. They want to know all that stuff. So when they do that, when you break it down by application, do that for them. Sorry, it starts to allow us to see what the data really is and create those buckets. Is it object? Is it production? Is it dev test? And so that's what we do, right? We go in looking at it from an application perspective to understand the data, which sounds a little stupid and like duh, but it gets overlooked, right? And that's what's going to drive that RTO, RPO. And it's simple, and most organizations haven't even thought through it that way. And when you say, inevitably, when we send out, hey, what are your RTO, RPOs, it comes back one answer, right? X for RTO, X for RPO. And then as we get into it and say, well, which applications are more critical? Well, we have to have email or phone systems up, right? And then you start getting into it and you realize that an organization is not just black and white. It has a lot of RTOs and RPOs, which are tied to those applications. So if you stick with that application mindset and don't get caught up in the, oh my gosh, you have tons of data and nobody knows where it is. If you follow the app, man, that app will lead you to the data and will lead you to the promised land of RPO, RTO, a real RPO, RTO that will fit for your organization.
I always, one of the kind of funny things I always hear is, every single one of our systems needs synchronous replication and we need to save our data forever. And if we recover it, it's got to be at the highest performance ever. And it's like, great. There's plenty of tools out there that will help you achieve, the Cadillac solution. But of course, once people see the price tag, right, it very quickly comes back to a conversation of what you were just talking about, Brooks, of what are the business requirements around RTO, RPO, and retention policies. What's nice about a data virtualization strategy, specifically, obviously I'm most familiar with Actifio, is you can have different SLA tiers right within the software. So I have some customers that break it down to a gold, silver, and bronze policy. I have other customers that have 50 different policies. And what's nice is for the first time ever, these IT leaders can go to each application owner and each business unit and show them, here are the different tiers we can offer you. Do your applications fit into one of these buckets, or should we create another one? And it also has allowed some IT organizations to get into showback or chargeback models, where they can much more easily show the business, hey, if you want this RTO and this RPO and this retention policy, here's what it's costing us. And if you show it, at least there's some visibility and there's an intelligent conversation to be had. Or if you can charge it back, right? Now you're turning IT into a profit center to fund other initiatives, and you're presumably making other business units be a little more understanding and clean and responsible about what they ask of IT.
And on those lines, I'll say this: one of the wonderful things about Actifio for us was that you have a recovery mindset, and you say SLA, like you tout it off like it's nothing. And for organizations, they're smaller and mid-sized that don't quite get that. What you're doing with Actifio is you're forcing yourself as an organization, or Lume comes in and we force and help you get to the point where you're looking at what is the service level agreement for my application. That service level agreement is what we look at when we sign with our vendors. But when you apply that concept to your own enterprise, man, it changes everything. It forces you to think in that recovery mindset. I've noticed that about Actifio, and it's been one of the things that's a standout for us. We're vendor agnostic. We have to use other tools, but for Actifio, that SLA concept, which for those, it maps your RTO, RPO, and application requirements if there's a recovery scenario or recovery event to a defined SLA, right? In the software, literally says SLA, and you can name it what you want, but I just want to highlight that. It's very, it was unique at the time, and really forces you to think about recovery, not just backup, right? How long can I be without this application, right? That's the simple answer that you have to ask for every app in your organization. If you do that, Jake, you can break down really complex environments, whether it's a Fortune 500 or a mom and pop. If you say, what apps are you using, break them down and go through that little list, you're going to come up with this natural, which Kevin hits, meets to reality, price point to reality, right? We'd all love to throw data in one big blob and roll, but that's where we're at today. All the data just lumped together when you got to break it out. So
I think
a great point about that.
Sorry to jump in. I think back to, there was a situation relatively recently with a local insurance company where, Tier 4 was taking their vendor agnostic approach, understood the customer's requirements, and ultimately introduced them to Actifio and then Actifio and Lume. And as we were going through the project, customer bought off on the technology and was ready to deploy. And we had a 45-minute meeting where they had 400 VMs or 400 hosts, a couple of physical in there as well. And we literally went through and worked with the customer to help assign. Right. This one gets a gold policy, this one gets a silver, this gets a bronze. And again, we keep using the word forced. It's actually a very positive thing, right? We shone the light on the fact that
enlightened.
And it gave the IT professionals the ability to go back to the business to verify. And one of the outcomes of this is not only have they already had to use their DR plan and do an instant mount, but they also have report metrics where they can go back to the business units and show that they are adhering to the SLAs where they never were able to in the past.
And let me just add something to that, a little more context and color, Jake, to the point Kevin made, is that it allowed them to go back to the teams of executives and say, hey, is this a gold standard application? It wasn't a complex conversation where you nerd out and they're like, oh, I gotta do that. It's just like, is this application priority? 1, 2, 3, gold, silver, bronze. And they're able to go, yes, no, yes, no. Now all of a sudden you have the whole company, right? Leaders, IT on the same page and signed off. And it is not complex. It's very simple, right? And I'll say this, there's this urge to just do backup recovery and get it going. And with this particular customer, there was some hesitance because they had been burned, which is why they've, Tier 4 helped them get Actifio, which they needed some service with the DR as a service through us, and we all worked together on this one. But there was some hesitance, and I remember the thing was, we got to get going, we got to get it back. And we're like, look, if you do it like this, you're not going to look back. Your recovery mindset, not just backup. And to your point, Kevin, it was what we were phase 1 of the implementation. They had to restore something. They did it in 11 minutes, and just couldn't believe it. Wrote wow, in 11 minutes we had everything back up and running, and it's because they stayed true to that SLA concept and simplified it, right? So, anyway, it was a good story.
And working through that particular project, I remember the client not even really knowing candidly who Actifio nor Lume was when we recommended both.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
because
I really gotta get on my marketing. I gotta get on my marketing team.
I mean, the reality is so many clients, they watch the PGA Tour, they watch, the NASCARs, they watch the Super Bowl ads, And
Yeah.
a lot of those vendors, they're in our database too, right? And I've shared early on, maybe in the call, but our database is over 700 vendors in 5 key areas: data center, telecom, managed services, security, compliance, and emerging tech. And they are some of the who's who. The biggest names in tech are in our database. But what I share with a lot of our clients is some of the most value add suggestions that we give as Tier 4 are not necessarily just the vendors that you've heard of. It's the products, the vendor partners, the ideas that you've never heard of. That,
Right.
again, I mean, historically, the client to back something up that took them 11 minutes with both y'all, probably takes them a day to a week. I don't know,
Yeah.
and that changes people's lives, not only the business, but it changes individual lives.
It's true.
Being able to do things that fast. So let's go ahead and bounce off script a little bit. We got about, never mind. We don't have 5 minutes until Joel jumps on and gives us the hook. But
Is that Joel jumps on and it's over, huh?
we have a few more minutes left, and we can go ahead and carry on the conversation as is necessary. So we've gone a few minutes over on some of these 17 webinars we've done through this process. But let's talk a little bit about, all right, interesting idea. Let's just say I'm a client and I'm listening to this webinar, okay? And I've never heard of Lume. I've never heard of Actifio. Again, this webinar was not meant to be a sales pitch for either of them, but to really develop the concept and introduce the concept of what copy data virtualization is and why it might matter. Is it for everybody? I don't know that it is. Is it something that a lot of people should take a very serious look at? Truly, as the founder and chairman of a company of Tier 4 advisors that is 100% vendor agnostic, I have no agenda to push here. You should take a serious look at it if you're having issues with some of the things that have been spoken about today. If they're hot buttons, if RTO is a concern, if your budgets are being slashed, if unfortunately you had to make cuts in headcount, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let me back up. If I'm a client and I'm watching this today and I'm saying to myself, okay, that sounds interesting, but I do not have 6 months of 4 hours a day to waste in the sales cycle of doing this. I'm interested in learning more. Candidly, if it made sense, I'd be interested in pulling the trigger. I also, however, don't have 3 or 6 months to delay an implementation. Like once I want to go, I got to go. Talk through that for a half a second. If someone's thinking this might make sense, what does that process look like? Kevin, first of all, you're going out and you're talking about, Actifio, or is Lume leading the way? Or are you guys both going together to architect, strategize, etc.? Who wants to take that and start?
Kevin, start. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah. So kind of a loaded question. Let me answer a couple different ways. The first one is, and I'm going to go back to something I said towards the beginning, right? I always encourage customers to think about this internally, right? And ask themselves 3 key questions. What's your largest database? How many copies of it do you make? How long does it take to make a copy? And the answers may surprise you, maybe they don't, but you're going to find multi-terabyte database, sometimes even dozens of terabytes and even into hundreds of terabytes for single instance databases. The organization is going to have multiple copies of those out there, and it's going to take, I'd probably say best case days, but more likely weeks for new environments to be provisioned. And there's a ton of process wrapped around that. So if you want to validate if there's a need for this, those are 3 questions we could start with. And then from there, I mean, it's as simple as a short overview with us. We can come back typically after a first call with a diagram comparing your status quo to what it would be like with Actifio, along with some back of the napkin math on what the potential savings could be. And we could wrap a Lume service around that if that's desired, but it really does not have to be a complicated sales cycle, and it usually isn't. And the deployment can be done, I mean, I don't want to generalize too much because every customer is different, but the actual deployment of Actifio and getting your first backup and getting the ability to do these instant mounts can be up and running within a day or 2.
I'd say that we work so well together with Actifio. They are recovery solution provides choice, hands down. We use other things, but when someone wants to do a disaster recovery solution with us, managed, it's Actifio, or you go do something on your own. For local backups, and that might, I'm not kidding. There's some things we're doing that changing kind of our direction on that, but they're wonderful. It's as if we're the same team, and I know Kevin feels that way, and that's a great partner. For us, we move fast, right? We need to know the number of servers, how much data storage you're talking about swag-wise, and your locations, like how many locations we're talking. And we can, usually if it's coming through us, we work with Kevin, and within no time, we can, day 2, you can have a number back so that you know if you're in the right ballpark. And then we can jump to, like you just said, deep dive conversations, talking about SLA and make you start thinking about these things, the spreadsheets. But we like to move fast, and it does not have to be an exhaustive assessment. You can take that approach, but just to understand where you're at. And if you're serious, it's probably because you're hurting somewhere, or in your mind you're neglecting something, and you need to really get moving on it now as opposed to later. And so we've kind of broken it down into 3 basic questions, and we can move. I don't know if that answers your question, Jake, about how do you start, right?
Yeah, so
talk to your tier 4 sales rep first, right?
Well, so we've talked a little bit about it. What about timing? So let's say, for example, the client says, yep, thumbs up, let's do this. From signing the contract with Lume, using Actifio, what is the typical deployment if someone wanted DRAS or DR as a service, for example, where they're kind of pressing the proverbial Actifio and Lume easy button and saying, hey, just help me have something that is a disaster recovery as a service. Here's my 4 and 8-hour RTOs, RPOs, or 2 and 4, whatever it might be. Just go do it. Are we talking 6 months until I can test?
No.
Are we talking
days?
Now I'm gonna throw something out here, and I'll let Kevin confirm or deny this. But I would say, to break this down per project, I'd say 10 terabytes a week. Meaning, if you have 100 terabytes, you could take that project and say, okay, that may be a 10-week engagement. If you have 10 terabytes, once we have all that data, it may be a 1-week engagement. And we break it down in phases. You get your local copy, then you worry about replication, and we keep you on track so that you don't try to eat the whole elephant at one time. Kevin, is that
I think Brooks, yeah, I
close?
don't disagree with
that.
But
it's not exact, but it's right in that line somewhere.
Brooks, you must have paid more attention in physics class. There's obviously physics involved here, but the deployment, the initial capture, the setting up the SLAs is typically measured in hours, at worst case, a day or 2. And then depending on the scope of the project, how many applications, what the tiers look like, how much data we're talking about, the types of data. The nice thing is both, or all of us, right? Tier 4, Actifio, and Lume, we've been doing this for a long time. So after 1 or 2 meetings, we're going to be able to give you an estimate. But we did this cool cost savings assessment comparing Actifio to a traditional backup provider in the cloud, and it was 55% less storage and infrastructure consumption in the cloud, and they expected a return on their investment. So return on the investment, including Actifio licensing, in less than 30 days.
Yeah. I'm giving a 10 terabytes a week. That may be a little vague, but Jake, we spend most of the time, Kevin, when we're on the phone with customers, it's more about mentally getting them in the mode of, don't think of it like, think of it clear. It's easier than you think, and break it down in SLA, like gold, silver, bronze. Start thinking about application that way. Stay true to that whole course, and we spend more time probably reminding them and explaining that concept and philosophy, and because it's a shift, it's a change. Recovery mindset is not the same as what people have done. Backup or.
And last quick answer, or last quick question is, if someone has a disaster recovery team, there's a way of using what we've talked about today and allowing those folks to still maintain employment and do what they do. Additionally, for the client that doesn't have the folks to do that type of work, you're basically doing all of that for them as a service. Is that correct?
So From us, yes, we can. If they don't have the team, then we can do it, you know, end to end. If they do have a team, they're wanting guidance, and what we're doing is to co-manage. We set it up. We work close to Actifio. There's always a professional engagement. We get it knocked out. We do all the heavy lifting because we know you have your day job, and we just make it happen and make sure that team. And that's why I'm talking about those engagements where there is a team. We're training them, getting them to understand it, getting familiar with the software, and really teaching them how to fish. We're always there, right? But if they understand and see, and remember, one of the examples we were talking about in that insurance space is they went the route where they trust but didn't verify. We create a solution where it's trust, it's visible, it's transparent, so they get to see what we see, right? And there's no secrets. That's the big thing. Get rid of all the secrets.
Perfect.
Secrets are where data gets lost.
I want to thank Kevin and Brooks from Actifio and Lume for jumping on the call. For those of you who sent questions, I got a couple text messages from some attendees. I am inside a rental car, and that's what the backdrop is, using my cell phone in the sun visor. That is a true story. So in case you cared. But if you were interested in what you heard today, feel free to reach out to any of the regional vice presidents that may have invited you to this call. Additionally, you can find more information at actifio.com or lumecloud.com or tier4advisors.com. So with that said, Joel, you've been very patient. Thank you very much for doing that. I will turn it back over to Joel. He'll close us out.
Perfect. Thanks, Jake. No, I was just admiring the conversation. Y'all did a great job. Kevin.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate you joining.
Thank you.
Thanks,
all right. Thanks all for attending.
Yep. If any of you have questions about copy data virtualization, how it might be beneficial for your business, as Jake mentioned, visit tier4advisors.com, talk to a Tier 4 Advisors team member. We'd love to be able to facilitate that conversation further. Make sure to join us next week, Wednesday, July 29th, 2 p.m. Eastern, as we will have an IT executive panel talking about the current change in the business climate, how IT leaders have shifted their strategy and operations in 2020, and what they're preparing for in 2021. So it should be a great conversation with some of your peers. So we'll see you next week. Thanks again, everyone. Talk soon.